I'm in Matthew 13, if you want to be joining me there. Matthew chapter 13, as we close out the year of 2019 with one more parable. I see we have several that have stayed over from the holidays, and we're excited and glad you're with us this morning. My family has done the same, except they stayed over in other places. And so they're traveling, and they're all well. As far as I know, I ask you to keep them in your prayers as they'll be traveling home this week, Lord willing. Also, Joshua and Morgan are traveling. Last Sunday was weird for me, but I'll get used to it, okay? Proud of that young man, and I'm proud of the church here for the way you have accepted them and encouraged him, and I know the Lord has a lot of great things in store for he and Morgan, and they are with her family, and I'm very thankful, and I'll say this publicly because I'm not sure anybody in this building understands fully other than myself. I'm very thankful that the elders have been patient and gracious and have given them the time to be with family. It does mean a lot, and so they're with Morgan's family this weekend and through the new year, and so keep them in your prayers. I think they'll be back Wednesday night, but so thankful for the year and for what it's been and for the strides and the gains that we've made as a church. And I do look forward and anticipate a greater year next year. Matthew 13 and verse 47, Jesus is in a series of parables here, and if you know anything about Matthew's account of the gospel, you know that the 13th chapter is the largest collection of parables. It is believed that he's sitting on a seashore here, and as he looks out, he's telling all of these short parables. If you go back to verse 44, he tells a parable. 45, he tells a different parable. And then 47, he tells the parable of which we want to look at this morning. Jesus says in Matthew 13 and verse 47, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea, and it gathered fish of every kind. When it was full, men drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good into containers, but threw away the bad. So it'll be at the end of the age, the angels would come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace, and in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. There's the parable. That's it. Not any explanation, no lengthy description. He's giving this onslaught of parables, if you will, as he's telling them there. And if it is, in fact, that he's sitting by the seashore as he tells these things, he looks out into the sea and he says, you know, the kingdom of heaven, it's like a net. And so maybe we need to begin to define some of our terminology in our parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a net. Well, we understand the kingdom of heaven to be the church, right? Used interchangeably or synonymously. So the church is like a net. It's thrown out into the sea, Jesus says. So I think it would be obvious for us to recognize the sea as being the world. Jesus, in his prayer in John 17, he said, Father, I do not pray that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. He goes on in John 17 to say the world is going to hate them because it hated me first. It's not that we're not in the world. We certainly are in the world. The church was never to be removed from the world in terms of the earth and time as we exist now. Jesus always intended, the Father always intended for the kingdom of heaven to exist in the world but not be of the world. In the same way, the net would be thrown out into the sea, the world. It's very commonly thought of, another parable that we've already covered about the wheat and the tares, that was the church. The problem with that is, as I shared with you a few weeks ago, that the parable itself, by explanation, Jesus says, the field is the world, not the church. But here I do believe fully that the net represents nothing more than the church. And it is the church that exists in the world as the net comes through the sea. In the net, we learn from our parable that there are fish of every kind. You and I are the fish. Those that make up, those that claim, those that want to be a part, those that find themselves being a part of the net. That is the church. We also learn from our parable that there is a sorting that goes on here. As the net comes up to the seashore, Jesus says it's like the end of the age or the end of time or the end of the world. Then the angels will come, Matthew 13, and they will sort the fish. The sorting we must understand to be judgment. And that's what's going to occur at the end of time. That's what's going to occur at the end of the world. There's where the separation is going to occur. That's what the sorting has to be in reference to. Notice that the angels are sorting what's found in the net. What is found in the net? Well, there are good fish, and there are bad fish. Within the net, yes. Within the net. So you mean there are bad fish within the church? Many, many warnings throughout your New Testament. It shouldn't surprise you at all that there are many, many warnings about false teachers and about false brethren and about false prophets and about people who would seek to divide and to destroy, to compromise, to destroy peace and harmony. And those are not people, you read your New Testament, those are not people in the sea, they're people in the net. And so I ask you this morning, what's found in the net? What's found in the net? What is it about the church? What is the difference between good fish and bad fish? Perhaps it would do us all well to back up and to analyze the net for just a moment. It is a huge, what they would call a drag net. Well, maybe some of you have used what we call a seine. And I've used one before in my life and made a few in my life. And we'd go out to the pond there and we'd find the corner and we'd throw that net across and we'd drag out the corner. Small net, I know they come in various sizes, but they would be small in size comparative to the drag net. This net would be on a boat. I know today we're very sophisticated and we have robotic arms that go out on these boats and let down the nets and pull up the net. In this day and age, we would use a crank system with ropes. And it might be that we would even put this net between two boats and we would drag toward the shoreline with the net in between the two boats. That would be very similar to a seine in that it would have weights on the bottom and floats on the top. That would be a necessity regardless of what size the net was or what its purpose was. And so the bottom would go down by the weight and the top would remain afloat. And there would be this effort to drag this net for a distance and to pull it up at some point in order to determine what's in the net. In Ezekiel 32 in verse 3, God is lamenting over Egypt and over Pharaoh and over the evil and the wickedness that's found in Egypt in Ezekiel 32. And God gives Ezekiel the vision prophet. He gives him this vision about what's about to occur and what's going to take place. And down about verse 3 of Ezekiel 32, God uses the terminology of taking a drag net and gathering. He also mentions it in Habakkuk chapter 1. In that small book, Habakkuk, the prophet, is describing a complaint that he has about the world. And Habakkuk has 3 or 4 complaints in that book. But this is the second complaint in chapter 1, begins about verse 12. And Habakkuk is basically saying, okay, God, what's going on in the world? We got good people, we got evil people, we got godly people, we got ungodly people. I mean, look at the sea, God. Do you see what exists? And down about verse 15 of Habakkuk chapter 1, God says, I've got a net. But he says, I've also got a drag net. And if you could look at the Hebrew of that chapter, you would see the difference between a net and a drag net. Because God uses those terminologies interchangeably. And basically what he says is, when I get my drag net out, I'm going to make a massive gathering. Unlike a small net, a little net, maybe a dip net, as we would think about it, that you would use on the side of a boat for one specific fish at one specific time, this net was used for many fish at one time, and they would all be gathered up and collected together. And what's found in the net is very significant. Because Jesus tells us in our parable, in verse 49, that the angels will come and separate out the evil fish, or the bad fish, or the rotten fish, or the no good fish from the righteous. In other words, what's in the net is a group of fish that are not profitable. They are not fruitful. They are not deserving. They are not capable of providing any value, and so they are taken and removed from the net. Now, the first thing you might ask is, well, why were they there in the first place? And the obvious answer, very simply put, is the net doesn't have any discrimination toward fish, does it? It just collects them. The net doesn't have the ability to say, oh no, you're a good fish. Okay, no, you're a bad fish. The net has no sorting capabilities. It just gathers. It's amazing to me that oftentimes within the Lord's church, we want sorting capabilities. The net doesn't have that. In other words, yeah, I think you belong in the church, but I don't know about you. Yeah, I think you fit in here, but you definitely don't fit in here. Yeah, I think you could be good prophet to the Lord, but I think you'll just be a drag me down. It's sad sometimes that the church wants to function in that manner. Please hear me, church. The net has no capability to sort the fish. All the net does is gather them. At the end of time, though, be advised, there will be a sorting. And the bad ones are going to be separated out. And the end of them is the fiery furnace, verse 50, into a place where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Since we ran out of parables in Luke's account, we come to Matthew's account for this last month of December, and we're covering parables that are only covered by Matthew and that all have an eternal judgment factor to them. And here's the last one. There's an eternal judgment factor here. It's clear from the imagery. I don't think we have to develop it any at all. They will be thrown into the fiery furnace. Make no doubt about it. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's only used to describe one place, and that is the place of hell. The eternal place of the condemned, of the followers of Satan. It's the only place that's described with this terminology. And so Jesus, no, he doesn't sit there and explain, now these fish are going to be taken out because they don't have any value. Their end is destruction, and they're going to a place of doom and gloom. He doesn't say all that. He doesn't have to. They understand it fully. But also in the net are good fish, right? You back up to verse 48. When the net comes up on the shore, they began to sort the good fish into containers or into vessels. In other words, when you pull the net up, that's only half the work. Now you've got to determine which fish are valuable. Which ones are going to sell in the marketplace? Which ones are going to bring you a profit? And it is those good fish that you take out and you put them into the live well. Or you put them into a bucket of water. Whatever your container is, whatever your vessel is, you're saving them for the profit, for the good, for the fruitfulness. But the bad, verse 48, you're throwing away. What's found in the net? Good fish and bad fish. The emphasis here is upon the separation or the sorting, the judgment of the two. And ultimately the angels are involved. But the good, those of value, are saved. When I flip in my Bible over to Romans chapter 8, Romans chapter 8, and I think about the good fish, listen what Paul says in verse 16. Romans 8 and verse 16. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. Who are the good fish? What is found in the net? What is found in the church? Well, there are good fish found in the church. Who are those fish? The children of God. And if children, verse 17, then heirs. Heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer in him in order that we might also be glorified with him. Who are the good fish? They are those children of God that when it comes time for the sorting, when the net is laid out, and hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of fish are in the net. God begins the sorting process. To where will you be put? In the container or thrown away? The reality of all of these parables, as simple as they are, they boil down to two options through the sorting process, only two. You call them whatever you want to call them, whatever name you want to put on them, they boil down to two possibilities. In this parable, you either find yourself in the container or in the vessel, or you find yourself thrown away into the fiery furnace, into the place where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. When the sorting comes, where will you find yourself? As you think about the net this morning, I want you to remind yourself that the net has one purpose. And the only purpose of the net is to catch fish. You remember on that occasion when Jesus came to the seashore and they were sitting over there and they were mending their nets? They hadn't been catching anything, and they had some holes in their net. So what do you do to a hole in a net? Well, you have to fix it, don't you? You have to mend it. A net's no good if it's not going to catch fish. What good is the church if she isn't trying to catch fish? In Luke 5 and verse 10, Jesus says to James and John, "Come and follow me, and from now on you will be catching men." Notice the careful wording of Jesus there in Luke 5 and verse 10. From now on you will be catching men. Not in a few days, or not next year, or not every now and again, or not occasionally. The idea is that, like the net ought to be, you will be constantly going through the sea with one goal in mind, and that is to catch fish. From now on, you will be catching men. He's talking to fishermen. He's talking to guys who had watched the net come through the water dozens of times, hundreds of times. And he says, just like that net, as you go catching fish. It's amazing to me, of all the attempts I made to catch fish in a net, how difficult it was. I'm thinking to myself, come on guys, I mean, this is easy, right? I've got all the advantage here. I'm in shallow water. They don't have much water, and I've got a net. We'll just force them into the net. If you've ever tried to use a net, you know you don't force anything. And very often, and very commonly, if there's a hole in that net, or if there's a side in that net, or I've even seen fish jump up out of the water over the net. Maybe you've seen the same thing. You can't force them into the net. Oh, I get it that you're dragging the net through, and by nature some are being collected as the process of it, but you can't force them. I'm going to cram the truth down your throat, and you'll either swallow it or choke on it. Most of the time, they're going to choke on it. We, the net, can't force fish to get in. Jesus makes a very simple invitation in Matthew 11, beginning in verse 28. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden. He said, I'm dragging the net. You want to get in the net? Get in the net. I can't force you in the net, but you're welcome in the net. Everybody's welcome. Come unto me. Anybody's welcome. Come. Church, we can't force people to get in the net. But what we do is we keep the net open so that they recognize the welcomeness that we're providing for them to get in the net. We can't force them in there, but then also we can't make them stay in there. Grab that fish by its fin and just throw it back in that net. I wanted to do it on an occasion or two, but I couldn't. Oh, if I could just grab them by the ear and drag them on Sunday morning, I'd have them sitting right beside me in the pew. Well, my advice to you is that may work, but it won't work. You can't keep them. You can't make them stay in the net. They may jump out. They may swim out. They may find a hole. They may pull a Nemo and swim down. But whatever the case is, you cannot make them. You can't force them to get in there. You can't make them stay in there. And what you do is you keep dragging the net. You keep the net open. You make sure that there's always availability to get in the net because the seashore's coming. And when the net gets to the seashore, you can't get in then. The availability is closed. But don't close the availability until that time. And then the last thing you need to realize is just because you're in the net don't mean you'll stay in it. Did you hear verse 49? The bad fish were, but now wait a minute, they were in the net. Yes, they were. They were in the net when it arrived on the seashore. Yes, they were. But can I suggest to you as kindly as I know how, that Ham was on the ark when they got off? Just like Shem and Japheth were. And if you know anything about the history of the Old Testament, you know Ham went a different direction, but he was on the ark. Can I suggest to you that Judas was one of the 12? If you know anything about your New Testament Bible, you know what happened to Judas. They were in the net. So let me draw two conclusions. Number one, there is nobody making it in the vessel that's not in the net. You need to hear that. You can't get to you can't get to the container if you're not in the net. When they pulled the net up on the seashore to sort out the fish, they didn't say, oh no, our containers are not full. We better just go diving out in the ocean and just trying to grab fish. No, the fish that made it in the container was the ones that were good in the net. No fish makes it to the container without first being in the net. But then conclusion number two, you need to hear it. Just because you're in the net don't mean you'll be saved. What's found in the net? What are you? Are you a good fish or a bad fish? Ultimately, that'll determine your eternal destiny. The sorting is coming. And my prayer is that you're prepared to be thrown into the container, the vessel. If not, the net's open. It's looking for one more fish. Won't you be that fish? And when you get in the net, the church, you be a good fish. When the seashore arrives, the net's still open. If you're in it, and you're that evil, rotten one, the seashore's coming. Jesus said, let me give you an invitation. Come unto me. Come unto me. We open that invitation as together we stand and sing.
Marvelous grace.